Okay, we're going to start with some presentations from our emergency agencies, or our safety agencies. And we're going to start with DPD. We're going to go through Fire, Denver Health, Paramedics Division. We have Kayak, which you'll learn about them. They're each going to do a 10-minute presentation on their safety agency. And, Kayak, yes, Devin from Kayak. And then at 11:40, we're going to go right into the interactive panel where you'll be able to ask as many questions as you want, and they'll be up here answering your questions. So I'm going to kick it off to Sylvia, who's going to speak for Denver Police Department.
Good morning. I'm filling in for Commander Pat Phelan. He had another situation to take care of. So let's see where we are. Special events. Okay, the Denver Police Department works closely with all of the special events that occur in the city and county of Denver, and our traffic operations unit works very closely with them because we have a special events unit within the Traffic Operations Bureau. So they work very, very close, setting it up, getting the police officers for security. So what I'm going to go through is what our specific part is as law enforcement officers in a special event in Denver. So the first thing I'd like to tell you about is that DPD will send out, once they know of an event, they'll send out this special events unit questionnaire to whoever's heading up or organizing the special event. And this goes through, let me see, here it is. So the security questionnaire considerations. So these are all the types of considerations that we need to know in order to provide our side of your event so you can have the best event possible. So we're looking at details for things like with the type of event, barricades and fencing. Are you getting a permit to go throughout the city and county of Denver? What's your parade route or event route? So these are all the types of things that we're looking for. Your security personnel, do you have security personnel that you're bringing in, that is your own security personnel, or is there security personnel that work at the venue that you are having your event at? And then do they participate in the special outside events from their day-to-day type of duties at that particular venue? The ingress and egress of your event is extremely important, and if you ever have any doubt about if you're set up correctly and do you have the proper amount of entrances and exits and stuff, contact the police department, contact the fire department. They're the experts on things like that because they've been doing it forever, as long as the fire department has been in existence. So there's always that expert to go to ensure that your event is set up according to fire code, according to the city ordinances, and that you will have the absolute most safe event that you possibly can. And then police security. Are you really going to need police security at that event? Is it that large? And the larger events, of course, require law enforcement. One of the main things, too, we're looking at is your private security armed? Are they licensed to be armed, or are they just the security that is unarmed? So these are all the things that you'll answer in this questionnaire. And then you'll send it back to our special events unit, and then we will go from there. So here we go with the type of event. You know, we're looking for the date, the time, where it's going to be your anticipated crowd size, because all of that is really a consideration as to how many police officers do you actually need there, how many private security, armed, unarmed, and so is there conflicting events? And usually that's done on the side of the police department, for us to look at, is there a Rockies game going? Is it the beginning of the Bronco season, and do we have a run going on at the same time? Because that is going to really stretch the amount of police officers that we could have at any type of event, because we are trying to staff all of those events. And there is a requirement that in certain venues that if there is a crowd over so many people that you will have so many officers. And I know sometimes it's left to the event to decide how many officers they want, but a lot of times it's set by the safety for the officers as well as the participants in the event, that there are enough police officers so that it is a safe event in case something goes wrong. Parking is always huge, especially because of how many events are in the downtown Denver area. And so people get really agitated about parking. So you want to be sure that when you push out the information about your event, that parking is taken care of or somehow mentioned in the information about your event. Is this a public or private event? And that usually makes a huge difference too, because most private events are not going to be in the Civic Center Park, something that big. Usually they're indoors, but they could be outdoors. So those are all considerations that law enforcement is looking for in order to put together their side of the safety plan for the particular event. So what kind of entertainment, the vendors, noise, food, alcohol, and of course now we always have to consider marijuana. And this is huge because a lot of times when there are events that have alcohol and now marijuana, we put undercover or plainclothes officers in that venue to ensure that there's not going to be sales of alcohol or marijuana to underage event goers and stuff. So it's huge, it's important, and we're there not to try to make arrests or ticket everybody and stuff, but to ensure that the event, if it's going to happen again the next year or in a few months, whatever the schedule is for the event, that you're able to do it. Because just like a bar, restaurant, liquor store, if you sell to underage kids, then there's a good possibility that you'll not get permitted again to have that event. And we shut down temporarily liquor stores or restaurants and with bars in them if we find that they are selling to underage people. So that is the reason why we do that. We don't do that to try to destroy the event or try to arrest people and stuff, but we want to ensure that that is not happening. So event details such as these are really, really important for law enforcement. Barricades and fencing. This is, I don't know if you can really see the red outline here, but this is an aerial view of the route for the Colorado Classic that happened last year in August. And so that was huge, and that started in Colorado Springs. It went up through the mountains and stuff, so it was a huge undertaking, and Colorado State Patrol took the lead on that, and obviously Denver took the lead on where they were going to have certain venues. And so there was this big fenced off area downtown that people who bought tickets could be, and there were some issues with that because there were more people than they anticipated. So there's always those learning curves too about putting on a huge event like the Colorado Classic and then finding out, boy, that fencing thing just didn't work for us. But what kind of fencing do you need for your particular event? Is it a chain link fence, or is it something that you need bigger, like Jersey barriers, those big concrete barriers? And you have to always think about the security you need in your event because there's a cost to it all. Chain link fencing is a lot less expensive than when you're hauling out the Jersey barriers to block streets or the route for your parade or your run, or in this case, the Colorado Classic bicycles. So this map is the route for the Parade of Lights that happens every year. So, and here's a picture of the Jersey barriers. So, because of the changing world that we're in, and it continually changes, that we do have to up our security in the way we look at things. And so having those threat assessments done, and we had a threat assessment done by our kayak for the Parade of Lights, because we saw a lot of those drive through the barricades type of situations happening in other states. So we were very aware of that. And so you're looking at what types of barriers do we need and really what has to be blocked off. Do we really need to block off every single alley, or because we don't have enough police officers to put at every single entryway that a car could go through, whether it be alleys or thoroughfares, the streets, coming out of parking lots. Those are all the things that, whether it's the Denver Police Department or your private security, that you have to think about. And remember, ultimately the event is yours and you want to have a safe event, so having that walk through with the event with the special events unit or with the Denver Police Department or even the firefighters, they'll be happy if you have concerns about the egress and about your event, that we're always happy to assist you with that. So security personnel, remember that when you hire security personnel that are not Denver police officers, that make sure that they're properly licensed. And if they're armed, make sure that they are properly licensed to be armed, because that could go downhill real fast and you don't want to get tagged on some type of an issue that you didn't look at their permitting or their licensing for the guards that you're hiring. And then, do you have adequate staffing? So is there adequate staffing to handle all of that perimeter of your event, and then whatever you need inside? Because the last thing you want to do is be stretched, for that staffing issue that, maybe it was just a question or a disagreement between a couple people, about maybe seats, if it's where everybody's coming in and sitting down at the venue, that a staff person could have taken care of. So staffing is really important with any type of event. So, and then is this an event like, and I'll take the Taste of Colorado. So we all know that that setup has to happen prior to the event actually starting. So there's overnight security. So those are considerations also. Do you need overnight security? And does that overnight security need to be armed? What is at your venue that has to be protected? So that those are all considerations. Do you need DPD officers, or can you have security guards that are armed, or do you just need security that are unarmed? Searches, handbags, whether we're searching handbags or like coolers, if coolers are allowed in the event and stuff, and then do you just need a wand or a magnetometer. And then are your people trained at that? Because a lot of times tempers start flaring when you've got a huge crowd coming to your event and they're waiting in line and it's taking forever because you've got this really conscientious person that's going to search everything and they want to know what's in every zippered compartment of that bag. And so make sure you train your people who are at the search area of the entrance to your event. What are they looking for? What is a good fast search so you could keep moving those people and getting them into the venue and that tempers don't start flaring? And especially if weather is an issue, you don't want them just standing there in the heat and waiting for this thorough search. You want a good search, but I don't think you may have to stop at having every zipper of some type of a bag opened. And then make sure that that is part of the information that you push out too. What is being allowed inside that event venue? And I know that when you go into the Pepsi Center, you can only have a bag that measures so big, and I think in Mile High Stadium stuff, you still have to have a clear bag if you take one in. So that's all good information for the public to know what can and cannot be brought in. And then the ingress and egress is huge too, so I'm going to use the example way back in 2008 when we had the DNC here, and everybody did such an incredible job, but at the last minute we moved President Obama's speech to accept the nomination from the Pepsi Center over to Mile High Stadium. So overnight, we moved the venue, we got it over there, and unfortunately, because of the amount of fencing that had to be put around the stadium, there were not enough exits for the people to leave at the end of the event. And so what happened was people got frustrated trying to get to the couple exits that were provided for, and they just knocked the fencing over and left. So, I mean, there was no it wasn't a big issue, but you really don't want your event goers to have to push the fencing over to get out because they're so frustrated they can't find the exit. So having enough exits and enough entrances for that matter is important to the success of your event. Communications is huge because obviously law enforcement is on one type of radio, private security may be on another type of radio. So to find out how everybody's going to communicate during your event is really important. And so that should be done a long time prior to it so that you can work out any bugs about how are we going to communicate with each other if we all have a different radio system and what does that look like. So you always have to consider your communication system that you're having at your event, and also to have a map of the area so that everybody that is working the event has that map and knows where the exits and entrances are. And then do you have security staff, medical emergencies? Do you have paramedics on standby? So those are all considerations for a successful event. Police security. If you feel like you need more security than what is happening on the day of your event, the police department can provide that for you. So here we have one of our dogs. It's a bomb-sniffing dog. And so if you feel like you need the police department to run a dog through your venue to sniff out for bombs and stuff, we are happy to do that. That is what we're here. You just need to request it. And then, of course, we have officers on motorcycles, bicycles. We have officers assigned to the staff and to the event that are off duty, and we also obviously have the on-duty officers that if a call for help or some type of situation would arise at the event would come in and assist also. And then an emergency plan. Whether you have an emergency plan for a severe weather that may come in because it's an outdoor venue, or terrorism, bomb threat, if there's any kind of information or intelligence that you know of, that you have concern about, for anything that might be adverse to your event, don't hesitate to contact us because that's what we're here for. And then I know Kayak is going to follow up on that also. And so that's a brief overview of what the police department does, and I'd like to turn it over to Jordan from the cell. Do you have slides? No slides. Okay.
Wonderful. Well, good morning, everyone. I'll just take a moment of your time briefly. You've heard, my name's Jordan Clark. I'm one of the assistant directors for The Cell, which is a nonprofit actually located right here in Denver, actually just a few blocks away. We're the Counterterrorism Education Learning Lab. And so you've heard of us briefly throughout this presentation this morning about some of the partners that we engage with to provide what's called our Community Awareness Program or Public Safety Training, really in partnership with local law enforcement, Department of Homeland Security, the Kayak, and a lot of our local public safety agencies to help train not only law enforcement security personnel, but with the resource to educate your volunteers, your vendors, stakeholders with the events that you service to help be those what we call a force multiplier, extra eyes and ears to help understand if you see something, say something. And what we actually do with this program, and really what it speaks to you all being private industry, special event venues, is this program has actually been Safety Act certified through the Department of Homeland Security as an anti-terrorism technology. And what that means is it provides liability insurance protections and coverage for you all against any acts of terrorism or those types of incidents that do occur if you do go through this program. And so what this program really is, the Community Awareness Program, is we actually partner with our law enforcement agencies that help support your events to train your volunteers in a very short amount of time on really what is it that they should be looking for and where they need to be getting this information to in a very short amount of time so that way nothing becomes problematic. And so we actually just got done training about 15,000 people for the Super Bowl in Minneapolis, working with their volunteers, the host committee, the planning committee, to train not only the volunteers, but a lot of the city personnel, the vendors, security personnel in and around the stadium to help enhance safety and security, but also facilitate the guest experience that you all certainly are very mindful of. You want to make sure that this is an awesome experience for those that you're serving, but also you want it to be safe and fun for everyone. And so we just want to let you know that we're a resource right here for you all. There's significant partners that we're delighted to work with, such as Pride Fest, I see the Classic in here, Pepsi Center and the Rockies and a number of others. But we want to just know that we want to be a resource for you all to help partner with you in this effort to keeping these events safe and secure. And I'm not going to hone in on what we know about what we've seen in the past. We just are excited to be a resource for you right here in Denver to provide this training. And whether you have 20 volunteers or 4,000 volunteers, we can really come to you and identify how we can train your volunteers and be that force multiplier to help enhance the safety and security for your events. And I'll leave some information on the tables just outside for you all. It does have my contact information, but we just want to let you know that there is a resource available to you all here in the Denver area to help provide some good education that's certified, that's vetted, really in partnership with our public safety community to help facilitate an awesome experience for your events. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll turn it back over to the experts here.
All right, so first I want to thank Katie and Ryan and their teams for putting this together. A lot of people in here I've worked with before. I'm seeing a ton of familiar faces, and I really, really, really want to thank everybody for being here today. This is something that I've been in this piece of the fire department for about 10 years now. Since the DNC, I was brought on over to kind of start working with events. So I have a significant background working with events, both public and private, with the venues and a lot of the events that you guys put on a daily basis. The mission of the Denver Fire Department, it is what it is. We're here for you. We're here as public servants to go out there and mitigate emergencies and help with preparedness and prevention. We do that through a couple of things: community involvement, working with you guys, partnering with different agencies within the city, and really being a collaborative effort together to come together and get everything accomplished so that we can have safe events that are good for the city, people are enjoying themselves, and we're just moving forward in a direction that's good for everybody. Public events, we have public assemblies, which are indoor events. We talked a little bit about, I think Ryan mentioned 700. Our Office of Special Events and Public Assemblies reviews somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1,600 to 1,800 events a year. That includes public and private events ranging from tiny farmers markets all the way up to the largest events that go on in the city. So we see quite a bit. And we obviously, we know we have everything from the Convention Center, the Pepsi Center, and to kind of talk about that a little bit, we spend quite a bit of time, and I want to throw props out especially to the three venues, Coors Field, Sports Authority Field at Mile High, and the Pepsi Center. They go to great lengths to put on tabletop trainings for all their partners and stakeholders, usually with Homeland Security, sometimes the FBI, and the various city agencies. And we really dig down into looking at how we would handle emergencies, both all the way from when it happens, all the way to how we deal with the aftermath and mental health and recovery processes. There's two sides of the fire department. I'm just going to cover our resources kind of quickly. We have operations and we have fire prevention. Fire prevention is the code piece. It's the legal piece, the law piece. Most everybody's familiar with the fire code and all the permits that you have to get. That is in our fire prevention division. We have a specific unit that does public assemblies. That's what they do. There's a team of about 4 people that work on that. There's a captain and 2 technicians and a civilian employee that work on the permitting process and navigating you through that. Usually you'll be routed to us through the Office of Special Events so that you can get the appropriate permits that you need, whether it's temporary membrane structures and tents, generators, anything to do with fuel. And we'll also look at, like Sylvia was talking a little bit about before, and I don't want to be too redundant, the access, ingress, egress. How close is your event going to be to buildings that you're not even thinking about? You're putting generators that are close to a building that might have an HVAC unit, and is anything being brought into that building from that generator? Are you limiting access to the fire department to get into that building if there's an emergency in that building, which isn't even part of your, may not be part of your specific footprint? So they're looking at all kinds of stuff like that. Obviously, Ryan touched a little bit about pyrotechnics. We review every pyrotechnic event. Every pyrotechnic event in the city has a Denver firefighter who's specifically trained in pyrotechnics, code enforcement, and review at that, whether it's, again, indoor events, outdoor events, wherever. Floor plan, site plan reviews, just like Sylvia was talking about. We will review anything. It's not a requirement unless you're at an indoor event. Fire code predominantly deals with physical structures. So if you're in a park, I can't give you what would be the widest access for your chain link fence. There's nothing in the fire code that says anything like that. There are some good and best practices that you should use, but with that said, there's nothing really that pertains to that. There are some rules and regs that pertain to how close you could put booths and tents next to each other, distances for propane and things like that. But the fire code predominantly pertains to physical buildings, structures. So in every building that has an event in it, I don't care if it's a Katy Perry concert or something significantly smaller like a Comedy Works thing, floor plans are looked at and they're reviewed for exit analysis and looking at crowds. The operations division, I don't know if that's kind of clear or not. We're broken essentially on duty every single day. We have 230 firefighters. That is firefighters who are working in fire apparatus ready to respond and mitigate emergencies. Essentially, we're broken down into 6 districts. We have about 75 fire rescue apparatus that are working, and we have a full technical rescue team. That includes structural collapse, confined space, high-angle rescue, swift water rescue, open water rescue, ice rescue, and a full hazmat decon team. With that said, unlike Denver Health and Hospitals and the paramedic division, and unlike the Denver Police Department, our assets are fixed. And what I mean by that is that we run 200 and approximately 30 firefighters, including the airport, every day, 24/7. It does not change. So if I bring in 500,000 people to Pride Fest, we don't upstaff. We don't upstaff for a Super Bowl. The only time we've ever increased in the history of the fire department since 1866 is for the DNC. That's the only time we've ever done it. So what that means to you is, if even a small incident occurs, even if it's just a heat-related, the temperatures are really high, we didn't have enough water, and the 911 system starts to get called and utilized, it will tax and burden our system. We are running approximately 150 to 160,000 calls a year, and the Denver Fire Department has no ambulances. So I don't know if that means anything, but we have some of the busiest fire trucks in the country. And we are highly, highly, highly busy, especially in the downtown area, which is where most of our events are. So having good, strong plans that are well communicated allow us to effectively work together as a team to kind of mitigate that. Obviously, control measures for success, and I don't want to beat a dead horse. Ongoing hazard analysis, which is what we've been talking about all day. Just looking at what could trip us up, even if you're just thinking about it. Continuous communication, both internal and external, with your folks that you have, as well as the various agencies throughout the city. And we have some very good mechanisms within our own infrastructure now that allow us to communicate and have good dialogue with each other so that we're moving in the directions that we could. Frequently on the fire department end, and it is what it is, we don't change a whole heck of a lot. We respond to, you tell us, hey, this is what we're doing, and we're just going to look at it and say, okay, I'm going to have to work around this. When we get there, we're going to have to move this tent. We're going to have to figure a way to get around this building. But there are some key things that you could do to help us, and that's having detailed maps, showing us where the entrance points are, showing us if you've gone through Denver Water and you're utilizing fire hydrants because now we have limited water supplies. Those are, firefighters and water, kind of, at least if you're on an engine company. And one of the things that I really like, and we did this recently at one of the venues, we have honest after-action reviews or post-incident analysis. When we have something, and even if we always have something that happens, take the time to do a good post-incident analysis or an after-action at various levels with your team, externally with the people that we've communicated with before, so that the next time moving forward, we're just that much better. And I think, James, you are up.
Thanks everybody for being here. It's an honor. I've been a paramedic for the city for this is my 25th year. I've spent about the last 12 doing event planning, done a bunch with Scott and the rest of our colleagues. And I wanted to talk to you today about kind of the medical considerations for stuff. Start by some history. Since Denver Health was established in 1860, we've always had ambulance service here in Denver, and going back to horse-drawn ambulances. And it's changed in flavor over the years about where it was housed and what it looked like, but so we've always been here, and we're a part of the city's response infrastructure, but we're also a part of the city's healthcare infrastructure and public health infrastructure. So we kind of have our feet planted in two different camps, which gives us some unique ability to translate. We speak firefighter, and we also speak public health. And so sometimes we can connect those two things together by being a jack of all trades, so to speak. The Denver Health and Hospital Authority, we're fortunate in Denver that it's an integrated health system that is a vertically integrated system that includes not only the hospital, which is often misconstrued as what Denver Health is. It's not just the hospital. The hospital is one component of it, and you can see all the other things they include. Community health centers, school-based clinics, correctional care, public health, the EMS system. And so it's a pretty big organization, but it also gives us some opportunities to pull in different expertise and to be a resource for you for medical planning and public health planning, along with the partners in Department of Environmental Health and Environment. But we're going to talk about just mostly the EMS component of it. Our primary mission is to show up when you call 911, and as much, and I can't tell you how much I appreciated Ryan's comments about 911 is not a plan. That is not a plan, and it shouldn't be your plan at home either. And I think personal preparedness is an important piece of this as well. But for events, I think what we're concerned about with events is that we still have to maintain the service to the rest of the city, along with our partners in the fire department and police department. And so what we ask of you is to make your event as self-sufficient as possible. And I like to think of events and the rest of our community as an ecosystem, and all the things are interdependent. And so I think we need your help. And I think Jordan mentioned force multiplication. One of the things that we believe that we can't provide everything to everybody. We don't have enough resources. None of us do. So we need your help in multiplying that force when it comes to taking care of people at events. EMS follows people, so we're not protecting property like Scott and the fire department do. And so our staffing does fluctuate with the number of people. You heard Ryan mention that we have over 1 million people in the city during the day, during the business day, and that trails off at night back down to that 680,000, 700,000 people. And so the number of ambulances on the street follows that curve of population, because that's what our services follow. So these are some of the other things we do. I won't go into all the individual ones, but we do a lot of other stuff in addition to, providing 911 services, and special events is definitely a core component of what we do, mass gatherings. So on a normal day, when you call 911, this is really kind of what it looks like. We work every day in tandem with the police department and the fire department, and Denver 911 as well, which is kind of the portal of entry into the EMS system. We also we work for Ryan when he stands up the EOC, and we provide the EMS branch for his operations in the EOC, and so when he taps us to do certain things there, we're at the ready. It's been really enjoyable to be part of that structure now and the training, and I feel like we're a lot better prepared now from what a lot of things Ryan set up in the EOC. So on special events, this is Bill Henderson when Estacio broke his neck. This is the kind of things that we provide coverage at the events. When we assign paramedics to an event, our mission is really the same as everyone else's mission. We want to have a successful event. We want everybody to have a good time. We want everybody to be safe, and we want to minimize. Our primary mission is minimizing the impacts to the 911 system, because people are still having babies, they're still crashing their cars, they're still having heart attacks, and we still have to be able to provide those services. And if your event, because 911 was your plan, is sucking all of our resources to it, then you're compromising our ability to provide those services to the rest of the city. So we want to help you mitigate that as a potential big picture problem. And then it's important for us to know about events because we do upstaff and we can help plan these things. We can anticipate potential draws on 911 resources if we know in advance kind of the scope of these events and the types of events. And I think my colleagues have talked plenty about the importance of understanding kind of the demographics of an event and the type of it. Because we can change our staffing. Or, for example, to posting configurations, if we know that Sylvia's map that had all the barrier fencing for the cycling event, if we can't get an ambulance into that because of that fencing, then we can change our staffing configurations to put people inside the fenced area and move them out to egress points, which punctuates, again, the importance of a detailed map. Where are the egress points? Where can we move people to get them out to transporting ambulances? So these are kind of the big things. Everybody had the same list pretty much on their list of requirements. For us, the footprint matters. So if it's a big event and we're assigning EMS resources to it, what we're trying to do is get patient care to a patient quickly. So if it's a big footprint, that changes the resources that we might provide to that event. So rather than having, and oftentimes I've worked with event organizers who say, we want an ambulance at our event. Well, I'm going to give you a little hint that an ambulance might not be the resource you want because it's one ambulance, and if it has a patient and it leaves to transport them to the hospital, you don't have coverage anymore. So we may want to assign paramedics to the event that aren't in an ambulance that can provide immediate care. And the good thing about being in Denver is that we're in the middle of our response area. So we can call in other ambulances to transport those patients and not lose your coverage at your event, your on-site coverage. We talked a lot about temperature and alcohol and all those things. For us, the biggest concern is what is going to produce patients or potentially produce patients. And so we're also, as I mentioned, we're the translators. We're also kind of the protectors of the hospital system in the metro area too. Because if we transported everybody who we encountered to the closest hospital and your event happened to be in City Park, for example, we would put all the hospitals around City Park on divert because we would crush them. And so part of our job is to disperse patients equitably across the healthcare system so that we don't cripple one particular facility. So that's another component and another capability that we bring to the party for the city's response infrastructure. We want to help you plan. I think it was Eisenhower who said, when preparing for battle, the plans are worthless, but the planning is indispensable. We want to be included in the planning and not your plan. So if you have things for us that you want us to do for you, we'll be glad to have those conversations, but we want to have the conversations. Don't just write us into your plan. And I think we're all respectful of each other in that regard and the safety community about policies and plans. We don't write each other into plans without talking to each other. Nothing about you without you. And these offer us a unique opportunity to do some planning for a disaster without hopefully having the disaster. So if we think about, in paramedic land, we live in this dichotomy of planning for what's going to kill you first and what's the most likely thing that is happening. So we have to kind of live on this spectrum of, I gotta address the things that will kill you now, but I also don't want to assume that you have the worst case scenario all the time. So I live on that spectrum of trying to figure out where you are on that spectrum as a patient. It's the same thing for planning for these events. You have to plan for the worst case scenario, but you need to also plan for the most likely scenarios that include things like it's 95 degrees out and there's no shade at your event. Well, you should probably have water or cooling stations or things like that. So So we want you to think worst case, but think also what's most likely. And we provide a bunch of resources. We're glad to help you. We'll help you develop a plan that includes how to get a hold of us, and we can provide on-site coverage for certain events. We try to limit those to ones that impact public safety or have, a high threat nexus to them. And we bring a lot of other stuff with us that, depending on the configuration of your event and the footprint of your event, we can bring things to move patients out to egress areas or to ambulance checkpoints or transport points. And those include bikes, the gators, foot patrol guys, and we have specialty carts at Mile High Stadium. But we use bikes a lot for areas where there's congestion or difficulty getting around. And I'll save the rest for the Q&A session, and I'll turn it over to my good friend Eric.
Good morning. I'm Eric Diamond with the Colorado Information Analysis Center. It says Devin Rhodes on there, but he's not able to make it today. I apologize about not having slides, but I figure I might make it a little more mysterious than what the kayak is. So the kayak was after September 11th, 2001. Fusion centers were established because the 9/11 Commission report said that information sharing was not where it needs to be between federal partners, state partners, and local partners. So after that, the Fusion Center concept was created. In 2004, the Colorado Information Analysis Center was put into statutes and bill and was created in 2004 underneath the Colorado State Patrol. It currently resides in the Colorado Department of Public Safety in the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. So we work with the Emergency Operations Center as half of our division, and then the kayak is the other half of it, and if there's a major disaster, we also do the mitigation side of the house. So the missions for the kayak is to provide an integrated multidisciplinary information sharing network to collect, analyze, and disseminate. So what that means is we want to work with as many people as humanly possible to get that information, analyze it, and to make this place the safest it could possibly be. And then we want to make sure we get that out to all of our stakeholders, the citizens of Colorado as necessary, and also the critical infrastructure holders. With that, we want to be the one central point in Colorado for that collection analysis, and we want to, again, do that through cross-jurisdictional partnerships between local, state, and federal entities. This also includes private sector partnership. I don't know if Jamie's still over here, but she's Department of Homeland Security, MPPD, Public...
Don't worry about the NPD
Yeah.
part. It's Office of Infrastructure Protection, so security assessment.
Yeah. So they deal a lot with, if you have a piece of critical infrastructure in the state of Colorado, they're going to go out there and conduct these site assessments. Wanted to give it a little bit to her, but they do a lot of the outreach to our private sector partners along with our critical infrastructure team within the kayak. And then with that, we also have a Terrorism Liaison Officer program. This is public safety professionals throughout the state of Colorado who come to the kayak. They get about 3 days worth of training, and then we send them back out to their agencies. They become our focal point for information. So your fire, EMS, and law enforcement officers throughout the state. The idea is to see something, send something, but through the public safety side of the house, we also work again with the cell and many others to try to message out the see something, send something campaign. Special event specific. So we have a few deliverables that we do with that. The big thing is in the risk assessment program, you have threat times consequence times vulnerability equals risk. The kayak is only going to be concerned with the threat and slightly on the vulnerability side of the house. We're not going to be telling you what your risks are or your consequence. So the first thing up is threat checks. Normally we work through the public safety agencies because we find that it works best that way. If you as an event planner come to us and request a threat check and you're not including Denver Police Department, Fire, or EMS inside of this, we're working in a vacuum at that point, and that goes against our mission statement. So all requests, normally we like to see them routed through the local jurisdictions. In this case, it'll be Denver. Once that request comes up to us, we're going to take a look at it from a Homeland Security and terrorism perspective. With that, we're going to liaison with the FBI, DEA, DHS, and many other federal partners, along with checking our state holdings for terrorism and homeland security related issues. The thing I wanted to tie in on this is we do not do deep dives on local jurisdiction areas. So if you ask me how many people last year were arrested at X event, or if they had a problem with parking, that is not something the state is going to get involved in, because that is most appropriate to Denver Police Department at that point, and we do not want to get in that world of trying to say what is DPD's area and what their concerns are. So with that, again, it's homeland security and terrorism related only. The big thing on this is, like we talked about with the New Year's Eve show, and then also the Parade of Lights, is on the threat side of the house, before you start throwing resources out there, we'd like to have the chance to work with you and your public safety agencies to figure out what the holistic threat is to your event. So the terrorism, homeland security side, the law enforcement side of the house, fire and EMS, so we can get that picture. Before you start buying bollards that you're going to put up on every street corner, and you spend half your budget on that, let's get this threat assessment done, this threat check, and work together and bring us in early on. The great thing about the kayak, in my view, is if we're in on your planning session meetings with our public safety partners, one of them that came up is about vehicle ramming. We know homegrown violence extremists are out there doing vehicle ramming like we saw in Manhattan. If you have a question, can a semi-truck make it down Spear Boulevard and start running over people? We have the analysts who can look at that and try to provide the answer to the public safety agencies. DPD isn't going to want to spend a whole bunch of time on that. That's what we're up there to do from the state's perspective on the homeland security and terrorism side. Is if you have that question, we will answer it. At that point, all the members of the planning committee can then look at their vulnerability, consequence, and the risk overall. Before you start spending your money, let us get the threat piece down. Because we are also a law enforcement entity, we don't have real jurisdiction per se, or we don't do investigatory, but we are a law enforcement entity. We can provide event support through a mobile analytics team. Primarily, you may not see that, but the police departments are going to see that. Not really Denver, because they're quite large, but some of your smaller police departments across the state will request our analysts to come in and to supplement, as they have officers out on the streets supporting the special event. Our analysts will come in and act as support for those special events throughout the state. And because we are a law enforcement entity, we have access to a lot of the same systems, and we can assist them. Getting towards the vulnerability side of the house with Jamie over there, we have an infrastructure protection team in the kayak. They go out and look at critical infrastructure across the state of Colorado. When it comes to special events, that team can go provide physical security assessments of your special event prior to it. And then they're going to provide you potential options for consideration. So these are physical security professionals. They're working, I think, Trooper right now is working on a certification for his PSP, and what we can do is bring them in, and if you're trying to set up the fence, they can tell you, hey, this is what the physical security professional manual states is a best practice to do, much like the fire department does, and they can bring that body of knowledge in, along with our DHS partners over there, who can provide you those tips that will help make your event more protected. And so that's kind of a synopsis of what the kayak is, what we do. Before the question hits, before we hit up here, because we do deal with a classified realm, people always ask us, are we going to be able to get classified information? If you find if a terrorist is going to be targeting us, the short answer is yes. If we know that a terrorist is going to be targeting an event, normally what we've done based off of lots of AARs of previous attacks and even Orlando's, we're working with law enforcement, fire, and EMS to get them security clearances, so that way it's a more seamless flow of information. But if we know that an event is being particularly targeted, at the very least, the public safety agencies are going to be notified, because DHS and FBI are the ones that will be sponsoring the sharing of that information. And if you have the need to know or right to know, that information will be passed down, at least to public safety and potentially to yourself, and you'll have to sign a non-disclosure agreement for that particular incident. Those are very event specific, and honestly, I've been doing this since 2006, and I've never seen one in Colorado. So the chances of that happening is low, but if you're ever concerned about terrorism, and will you get the information? If we are aware of a particular threat, the jurisdiction that's handling it is going to be notified, and then if the federal agencies deem that the event planners need to know, you can also be. So, any questions real quick? Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Erin Atkinson with the Office of Special Events, and I have the honor of moderating our question and answer section. I know you've all been waiting. So at this time, I'm going to have all our panelists, or all our panelists come up. And then if Carol and Rex are still here, if you could come up to the front and sit in the front, and David, and as well as anyone else that's spoken today. Just to give you an overview of how we're going to run this so we can get to as many questions as possible. Nate Hayden and Anika Alston are going to be on either side of the auditorium. So if you have a question, please make your way to one of them. Speak into the mic when they ask. We'll go side to side just so we can get to as many as possible. If you don't want to ask your question on the mic, feel free to hold your card up. Karen Corelli with our office as well is going to be grabbing cards from you, but don't be shy. I know as a recovering event planner, listening to all these amazing presentations, I have tons of questions, so I'm sure you do too. So. Yeah, while we're waiting for you guys to make your way to either side, come on now. I'll kick us off with one that I have as I've been sitting here. So we've talked quite a bit throughout these presentations about see something, say something. I'd love to hear from our panel, how do you message that to your event goers and your volunteers? What's the best plan for that?
Well, one is to tell them. I mean, part of that is to tell your event staff, train the event staff through like the CEL and other training programs. The other piece is putting that up as a part of a flyer or part of a handout or just a little block that says, this is, see something, say something, do something. I'm still going to go with my addition that you have to do something about it. You can't just see it and say it. But I think there's a lot of things that you already do, whether it's message boards, whether it's displays, whether it's somebody saying things at the start of an event and kicking it off. There are ways to message that.
Thank you, Ryan. He's absolutely right. And what we try to do too, not only do we message that, but if we get information coming in to us about those, I mean, people do respond to that. They see things that are suspicious, unattended packages, suspicious packages. We put that message right out to, if we have a command post or if we have an event going, we put that right out to that event too. And we investigate every one of those. So any information we get from See It, Say It, we look into. So we take that serious and then we determine the threat level. Is there a good threat level? Do we need to do more investigation on it? So that information that we get from See It, Say It is so valuable, the information we get. And I'm trying to think how many different situations in the last year we've actually moved on more investigation from information we received from someone that saw something suspicious and called us.
I'd like to just add real quick to that I feel like we have an opportunity collectively to change the culture of how we manage these events and to include you and your staff as a critical component of how these are managed. And again, going back to the comments about force multiplication, I agree with Ryan, see something, say something, do something, and same with run, hide, fight. We add treat on the end of that. Run, hide, fight, treat. You should know how to stop bleeding to provide initial care to people that are injured too. And so I think as a group, if we can walk out of here today with that kind of a direction of changing the culture of these events, that you're part of the solution to these as well as are the people that work for you.
And one last comment is that we call that the culture of preparedness. And that's what we're really trying to create within Denver, is this culture of preparedness, that this is just part of your job. This is not something that you have to worry about just because of Vegas or just because of some event. It's just part of your job. And it doesn't matter if we can go back to the early 1900s and find special events that went wrong. Okay, so this is not new. We're just trying to build this culture of preparedness.
Thank you. Over here? Yeah.
Hello. I work for a nonprofit, and so for our smaller events, I pull the permit, I order the pizza, and we have a good event. But for our larger events, we hire an event contractor, and so our staff kind of focuses on the mission pieces of the event, and we leave the event logistics to the contractor. And I was kind of wanted some feedback or some advice on which tasks or which pieces that you've talked about today would be appropriate to hand over to an event contractor, and which things we should keep kind of like a tighter lid on or keep more in-house.
Okay, I'll just jump on that one. The first thing is the ability to shut down, to delay, to defer, to close an event. I think still belongs to the event owner. I think that part is still something you need to keep in your wheelhouse. And then the logistics side is more the making sure things are bilingual or appropriate for the demographic so that people can get out. If you're dealing with a large group that has access and functional needs, the logistics of how do they get in and out of the venue, that's a great thing for a logistics contractor. They know how to do it. The event contractors do that all the time. That's their bailiwick. But the decision process, and then maybe what you want to, when you want to notify, and then the logistics are the how to notify.
Yeah, and I was going to kind of piggyback onto that, and you'd said something about sharing the information and what you should share. I'm a huge fan of sharing as much information as you can, and there's really nothing that we're doing that it needs to be classified, confidential, compartmentalized, or siloed. It really needs to be shared as much as you can. It can be broken down a bit so that it's more delineated and specific towards groups, but really the more information sharing you have, usually the better informed people are, and then their actions are more in line with what you're looking for.
Great point.
Thank you. So over to Nate's side, we have a question on this side. Oh, okay.
Shoes first.
Thank
So
you.
I'm probably the parking geek in the room. And police is the only one that brought it up. But for me, parking and transportation, it is really low on the list as we've been speaking here, but it creates an influx. It creates hazards. There's perimeters. There's different points because you pointed out, is it an adult event? Is it child friendly? Because if it's an adult, transportation could be public transportation. If it's kids being housed, their vehicles are coming in, they need somewhere to park. The handicap accessible community needs to be closer to the event, so you need designated parking. Smaller events, when it's in a neighborhood, it creates parking for residential areas. I would like to see it a little bit higher on the list and talked about, because as parking, it happens always, and then at last minute, we're trying to reserve locations, we're trying to mitigate situations. If alcohol is involved, people are going to go back to those vehicles and then drive intoxicated. So I think it plays a bigger role than what we've talked about here. And for event planners, I think it should be just a little bit higher on the list.
To answer your question, it's not a little deal. Matter of fact, if anything gets more attention is the complaints we get based on what you're talking about. So we're very aware of what happens with those. So I think it's part of the planning process too. Obviously, it's a big deal, especially when we do perimeters and they're fenced perimeters and there's access or no access to locations. We should be taking that into consideration. And that should be either doing some outreach in the neighborhood for the event planner itself or some participation with the police, getting some messaging out, because we could do some messaging on what's going to be closed, what's not going to be closed during what hours. So I think it's very important. What causes us the most pain probably is complaints on traffic access and parking. So it should be a big part of your planning.
Can I add one more thing to that too? I would add that in your planning to include ride-sharing stops too, because for some reason the ride-sharing service folks think they can put their blinkers on and stop anywhere they want. And so ambulances, every weekend we have trouble getting ambulances down Broadway because of ride-sharing services just stopping in the middle of the street.
Was that a complaint? That was a complaint you're making? He makes a good point. Matter of fact, we're doing some future planning on some future events, and maybe Katie wants to talk about that, but that is a big issue, ride sharing, because it's popular, it's successful, but it causes problems. So we're looking at different venues and different events, trying to designate parking areas, making sure these people that are using, because it is very convenient. Who does use ride sharing? Yeah, exactly. That's my point. And I see a couple people here from the Pepsi Center, and they can tell you the problems we have with ride sharing there. But that's something that has to be planned and I think designated. And here, if I'm going to have an event, I'm going to maybe designate an area for ride sharing and make the people walk to that. And it really works. It makes your event work, because what we're trying to do here is have you have a successful event. And if people, it's convenient to get to and get out of, that's part of being a successful event.
And I'll say the same thing. As we said about risk, the venue and event risk, for me, the number one thing on that list was traffic and transportation. That's the thing that's likely, that's the thing that's going to impact you directly. All I was, I think, saying in the emergency management realm is that the city itself doesn't prioritize necessarily that in the same way. It's not that we don't look at it. I mean, 50% of our general obligation bond is going to transportation and mobility. I mean, we recognize the issue. It's just that we may not write a citywide plan that looks at it the way you do as a event planner, saying, for my event, I need these things.
And I wanted to kind of add something to it, just to give everybody here just a different perspective on how the police is looking at it and how everybody's looking at it. According to that. So when we have large events, the fire department looks at parking as far as what hazards do those vehicles or the vehicles in those lots or areas, what could they pose? How much explosives can I put in that car, that van? What's the impact zones? What are the radiuses? How much hazardous material release? What's the wind direction going? So we will take a look at and see all of those factors and how that impacts us and our response. And it's not publicly known, but those are things we think about when we talk about parking. And other people are thinking, man, I want to park as close as possible. And we're thinking, oh, man, that could be bad. Right. So, when we think about things, we all think about them in our own little world. And so I just kind of wanted to share that with you and some of the larger events on how we look at parking.
Yeah, and Commander Phelan touched on it briefly, but it is something the Office of Special Events is looking at very closely. As we all know, the city is changing every day. We have construction, we have new people moving in, so these parking plans need to be, parking and transportation plans need to change as the city changes. So definitely something that we're always working through and learning, and as soon as you think you have it figured out, something else changes. So Sylvia, yeah.
Have one more comment.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's so many different areas in the city and county of Denver when you're looking for parking about how to resolve your event parking issue, and not as a police officer, but as part of the planning for the Dragon Boat Festival that happens at the last weekend of July every year, the Sloan's Lake area. Of course, those neighborhoods were up in arms about the lack of parking when that event took place. So what we did was we talked to Mile High Stadium to see, can we use that as our parking venue, and then we provide the transportation back and forth to Sloan's Lake. And it has worked out wonderfully, because the problem was that the event planners were afraid that they would lose participation in the event if the parking problem wasn't resolved. And on a different aspect, because of the changing demographics of downtown Denver and the amount of residential buildings we have now, that's huge when we start closing off streets. And I'm going to take this last Parade of Lights as an example, that when you are talking to your event staff, and make sure that they are reasonable with the people who are trying to get home, and they have to go through the barricade and they have to get around the parade floats or something to get home, because that's all they're trying to do. So the police department is there, and we do everything we can to assist people getting to their home, which just happens to be beyond the barricade for the parade. So make sure that your staff is aware of that, because although the parade went without a hitch, I actually worked the parade, and so there was a conversation between me and one of the staff members about allowing these people to go home, and yes, we had to move the barricades to do that. And in the same aspect, when there are businesses inside that barricaded area, they want people to come to their business, so let people walk through that barricade to go to the restaurant or the store that they're trying to get to.
Okay, we have a question over here.
So in my world, I'm the primary person that speaks for the event when there's an incident, a significant incident. However, sometimes I'm out and about. I'm not where that person went down or whatever that incident happened to be. So I'm seeking advice. We typically tell all of our staff that nobody can speak about anything, even if there's a dead person on the ground. They just say, yeah, I've talked to that guy over there. What is your best message when we have a significant incident and there are uniforms around, there are other people with responsibility? Do you defer to us, or what's the best practice?
You know, unfortunately, that does happen frequently. And I think the best results that we had is we have to get together on that and get a message out that we both agree upon. Because what happens, especially now with social media, that's great. You know, you might not want anybody to comment on that, but it's already out. It's too late. It's out. And whether that's accurate information or not, and we can get that social media out too, but we would like to get with the promoter and say, hey, this is the message we're going to send out. Do you agree with this message? Is there a message you want to tell us that we could push out? So it's kind of like a JIC, you know, Joint Information Center. We try to get that information and speak in one voice and the same message.
Anybody else have an additional comment?
Depending on the size of the event, and also if there is a longer term event, then the police and fire have their press, EMS out in the field. We will consolidate that message across the city if it's a larger event, and that is where you'll be starting to be referred to the city to do that in our Joint Information Center. Again, we want that coordination. That Joint Information Center takes time. So unless that's already stood up for your specific event, which, let's be honest, is not usual. We do not bring in 95 city staff and the mayor and sit them in the EOC for a parade. We work the parade, and if we feel that the situation warrants that, then we bring those additional people in. Also, the mayor likes to go in the parade. So yes, find one voice, speak with one voice as much as possible, and I agree with your guidance that generally nobody else should be. You find that one voice and you get everybody else out of that doing press interviews or tweeting about it or picture taking or anything else, and try to manage that story so that it's consistent. I'm not saying manage as in lie to them. I'm saying truthful, honest, correct information as fast as possible, but with one voice.
Scott?
Yeah, and I think there's two really strong points to that. One is the importance of building and developing relationships and the importance of a strong communication plan. So you know the key players are talking to each other. Key players from the city, key players with your event immediately are having that relationship, or they have that relationship, so the dialogue is being had, so that there's not this there's no reflex time in getting a singular message out to the public. It's immediate and instantaneous. And the other piece of that is the more you develop those relationships, sometimes, you know, and again, I'm speaking from the fire world, not every fire is the same, but there's a lot of similarities. And so, and I'm not saying have a pre-canned message, but a lot of times you could be on the same sheet of music before, just through tabletops after actions and talking through things, even within various events, to say, hey, wow, this happened over here. Man, I didn't know that happened over there. So amongst yourselves, sharing what went well, what didn't go so well. Man, this happened at our event. This is the message we sent out. Here was a breakdown of communication. Here's where it went well. And so building those relationships with each other and with us really effectively increase your communication plan, both formally and informally.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to add to that is just to manage everyone's expectations. You know, oftentimes if you and I are there together, and you have the quote-unquote dead guy on the ground, I can't talk about what's going on with that. There are federal healthcare privacy laws that prevent me from giving you that information. If you acquire it passively by standing there watching or whatever, you can message whatever you want, but I'm limited very much in what I can say about it. And so for in that situation that you described, you can push your message out. I can't really say a whole lot about it.
Yeah, hi. First of all, my condolences to another fallen officer. It's unbelievable. My question, I'm kind of beating a dead horse. I'm hoping, trying to get the horse to wake up again. But the situation is that in my position and some of my colleagues, when we deal with some of the event planners, so a lot of the message that you're giving across is more for the larger festivals that deal with this kind of stuff. Well, there's people that are small to growing, and the question runs across, well, when do we need to start implementing these type of situations? And frankly, I can't answer that question. You know, like, is it square footage? Is it people? What is it that where those type of information needs to start filtering down to their events? Because frankly, a lot of them go based off of cost more than based off of safety. And so how can I translate that answer to them saying, I know it's going to cost you more, but this is better for the overall safety. You have now crossed this threshold.
Well, I'll just start from the citywide perspective that my answer is for every event, these planning factors should be considered. There isn't the firm cut for every single event, and definitely not for every single service. It depends upon your venue. There's a lot of variability. I think that's one of the things that my staff is trying to wrestle with is there is some guidance out there from different cities, but those don't necessarily all translate one for one. So we're working those issues. My answer is first, you'd need to apply it to a party of one, and then work up. So you're still worried about transportation, you're still worried about security, you're still worried about egress, you're still worried about warning. It's just you only have one person tell. But then you get bigger, you get to thousands, and then you're talking about, my staff cannot, do all of those people. And when you get that beyond the size of your team, then you need to start thinking about how do I add in that capability. So that's just, I'm not answering your question still. But I'm accustomed to that. And so we'll continue to try to develop those thresholds. I know that we're working that with EMS, trying to develop what those thresholds are when you have to have a medical plan. I think police and fire have done this the longest, so I think they have the best answer.
You know, you make a good point, and I think maybe Sylvia touched on it. When do you need security? When do I want it? I know everybody out here, I want security, I want it tight, I want security at every entrance, I want magnetometers, I want people to be wanted. Who's paying for that? And how do I justify getting that? When I know as a security expert, I think we need to have that. And so it gets, I don't want to get into too much of the finances, but it gets down to, hey, it's your event, it's your reputation, it's your guests, it's your patrons, it's your friends. They're attending that event. What do you want to provide for them? What cuts can you make to get that security in place? And it comes down to two. What kind of event are you putting on? You know, is it a concert? Is it a Tiddlywink convention? Whatever it could be. Matter of fact, did anybody see I have to bring this up. The cornhole competition on ESPN, the championships. I could not believe that. Anyway, but they had security, and that's my point. They had security. And I look at that because, that's part of my job, but it was on ESPN. I couldn't believe it was on ESPN, but they did have some security stations there. But that's an important part, and I think it's important as a security expert, if they call you into that, to at least try to make some assessments. If we could help you, obviously reach out to us, but make some assessments with your expertise and provide that to the event planner. Says, here's what we have, here's a potential, what could happen, and here's why I think we need security. People could be trying to bring in this substance. People could be trying to bring in weapons. I'm just throwing this out here. what do you need? And here's what and it's up to each event planner to decide, hey, this is my event, this is my reputation, and hey, you know, I might not make as much money on this, but I think it's important to provide that, if that
You
helps.
said reputation. I'm going to say one other word for emergency management, your liability. So just keep in mind that you are the liable party in many of these cases. So once you receive that permit and everything else, you understand why you have to get a permit for it? It transfers the responsibility and the liability from us to you. You permitted that event. You said, I'm going to provide. You're liable for those results. So we're not trying to just, I mean, they're still going to sue everybody, but the liability is coming to you as a company. So if you want to stay in business, there's times when you need to make a risk-benefit analysis, and that risk-benefit analysis really includes a cost-benefit analysis. You don't need everything all the time, I think, and the point Sylvia made of sometimes you have to bend and be flexible so that you're building the right relationship with the community and to the patrons. But we all want security. We all want perfect fire protection. There are some limits that you have to decide. Yeah, it didn't answer the question twice.
Yeah. And I wanted to add, you know, really to get down to, what I would do is Katie and her team at the Office of Special Events is a great place to always start. They work with us daily. They know what our needs are usually. They could start those conversations. So whatever your event is, if you go to the Office of Special Events, contact them, and have that dialogue, they'll be like, yeah, you really need to talk to fire. You really need to talk to EMS. You really need to talk to community planning and development. There's all these things that you need to do. And they could start getting you going in the right direction and moving you towards where you need to be, because they do work intimately with every agency within the city. So for me, if you have a question, I would call the Office of Special Events. I hope I'm not putting a workload on your team. But that's where I would start. And they're kind of like that central hub that could kind of kick it out, farm it out, and tell you where you really need to go, and if it warrants having those conversations and dialogues.
Thank you. These are great questions. I believe we have one over here, but my big takeaway from that was, Commander Phelan, you're going to join the cornhole competition next year? So we'll have to find a different date for this over here.
I couldn't look away.
Trained cornhole athlete.
My goodness.
Elite cornhole athlete.
Over here.
Well, we obviously don't have the draw of the cornhole competition with my group, but we're working up to that. So we're a growing organization and a growing event. We haven't had the need for this type of, or maybe we had the need, we're just now becoming aware of it. But my team made us aware of this, and we wanted to be a bigger part and take an active role in this. I think you've all established that there's a difference between what's legal and then what's suggested, or what is, you know, benefits from good judgment. So, and I think, Scott, you may have just answered the question I was going to have, but is there a coordinated or streamlined way that we could enact something like, I mean, I really appreciated this, and this is not law, this is suggested and judgment. So this takes time and effort to build. So how would one go about creating something like this before you need it?
I'll give you my opinion.
Sure.
It goes back to the planning's more important than the plan. If you write something this thick, full of color pictures, and that's really cute, and it's, you know, outstanding prose, nobody's going to read it. So you sit at the table, you sit down with your team at the table, and you anticipate things, and you talk it out over as a tabletop thing. And then once you kind of get your footprint identified and your layout, then throw the situation of what if something bad happens in here now, and then talk through that whole scenario. Here's what we're going to do, and you're building your plan by that conversation. And it doesn't matter what size your event is, you should be having those conversations in advance.
What's a tabletop?
Oh, tabletop is in exercise design. A tabletop is basically that. Like, you put a map on a table and throw a scenario at it, and you figure out how you would deal with it, and then you come away with lessons learned from that and hopefully feed that back into the planning process so that you're anticipating those things and coming up with solutions.
The one thing I'd add to that as an emergency manager is that what we're really talking about is the planning is more important than the plan, is the relationships, is knowing what each person or each agency is going to do is far more important than the writing it down. However, since I'm also an emergency manager, it would be really good to write it down. Because when you go to trial after that, you're going to want Exhibit A is, I have a really good plan with Scott Color pictures in it, but I'm not taking anything away from what James is saying is, you've got to build those relationships, you've got to think through it, you've got to talk through it. If you just yeah. At the end of the day, though, you're really going to want a written plan, but that written plan comes from the relationship. It doesn't get written in a vacuum. If you sat down and wrote the plan's worthless. I mean, we're writing a plan that includes over 170 different agencies and non-governmental partners and community partners just for the city and county of Denver. That takes years, just so talk about commitment of bringing those people in and having those dialogues and building the relationships so that police and fire and EMS, they pretty much know what they need to do. But now, how do I get the fusion center in there? How do I get the state? How do I get state patrol? We have the state capitol here. We have federal government here. How do we work with all those partners? So that planning is the key, but document it at the end.
No argument about that. I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
I think my question was more about like, how do I interface with all these groups? Is there a coordinated way
Yes.
to do that?
So the Office of Special Events, yeah. And, we've talked, we're going to turn it over to the next question in just a minute here, but I do want to note, we talked a lot about how we work with public property events primarily, but our doors are open to any event. So you have our contact information, reach out to us, and we're happy to coordinate conversations, meetings, whatever is necessary. So we're going to kick it over to our next question here.
So this is another threshold question. You guys have talked a lot about making sure you have a clear decision-making structure and the owner of the event being in charge of executing that. In my experience, especially with relation to fast-moving weather and sometimes capacity at outdoor events, it can get a little contentious. Where's the threshold in when that decision-making moves from event managers to EMS? When is it no longer our call?
So just as the warning lead for the county, I'm going to start with one, if you're talking fast-moving weather, the federal government actually gets there before any of us do. The National Weather Service in Boulder, which we have a hotline to, literally pick it up and it's answered at the other end, but they'll issue that warning almost immediate. They're the ones looking at that from the weather side, and they will issue that warning and everybody gets just like an Amber Alert, a weather alert on your phone. We then will take actions either at the 911 center, fire does that at Denver International Airport, their ops staff or us, and we'll start issuing like the tornado sirens. So that isn't sometimes your call. If it's immediate life safety, we're going to supersede probably your process. And your process should be, if I see this alert and if I hear the siren, what do I tell my staff to do to help implement that protective action? If you're talking about the longer term things or something that's slower moving, and then the idea is the police generally, police or fire, will engage you directly and ask the event to be delayed or to be postponed and let you implement that. And that's, so if we knew that the flooding was happening, but it's going to take some time, we're going to engage you at the local level, at the event level, instead of saying that to everybody and kind of superseding. But if it's tornado or supercell, you're not even in that discussion process. We're going to issue that warning. We're going to do it to the whole city or a whole area, and we're going to do it almost instantaneous.
On the EMS side, to get to that part of your question, I'm not going to make you do anything. Our thing is, really, we're there for patients. So if your event's starting to produce a lot of patients, I'm going to find who your point of contact is and say, hey, you need to fix whatever's producing these patients. And that might be sometimes, and sometimes hopefully we've addressed most of that in the planning part. And, you know, if we're looking at the weather forecast a week out and it's 100 degrees and you have no shade, then I'm going to tell you, hey, man, you probably ought to figure out a water supply for people and provide it for them. Or you should have misters or shade, you know, put tents up for shade or things like that. Because if we get to game day and, you know, we're sending ambulances constantly to transport people out of your event, then we'll have a different conversation. And then, and you know, and it'll probably include all of us in the public safety, in the response community, because it's going to impact all of us.
So when we're looking at a weather event, whether it's, you know, we have venues that do, right? So we have Red Rocks, we have Coors Field, we have these open venues that have people in them all the time, and Commander Phelan's there, I think almost every one of them. So, and this is not uncommon. So really what these venues do is you have to have a good relationship with the command team, with you guys, the command infrastructure with us, and a decision is made. The information is garnered. We look at the information and say, what's going on? What's the track of this? And you make decisions. Ultimately, you know, usually in a good system, nobody is saying, hey, dude, you're not it anymore. It's us. It's usually a collaborative effort, and it's gently passed off from one to the other. Like, this is not your decision anymore. This is the fire department's decision to evacuate this venue. You know, it's never like, sorry, this is too big for you. It's never like that. What it should be is, we know your command team, you know our command team, we're in communications, information is coming down saying, hey, in 7 minutes, we're gonna have a really bad whatever. Decisions need to be made. And then we make a decision. So, and I'll let Commander Phelan speak to that, maybe from a Red Rocks or a Coors.
And I think most of these major venues have a threshold. You know, lightning is 1 mile away, or 2 seconds, whatever they do. They all contract with a private meteorological company, and they know what it is. But what they do, and we've done it several times at Red Rocks, we saw it done, I think, in the Broncos in an NFL game where they stopped play. But that's done as a unified decision. A unified command comes together, emergency response team, whatever venues want to call theirs, and they'll make a decision. Hey, we understand this is your venue. We understand you're a promoter. You're here to make money. What is the most prudent decision to make? And is it going to shelter in place? We think it's going to come over. We're going to pull the band off, or the players off. So those decisions are made jointly, but not one individual should be making that decision.
Okay, thank you. I think we have a question over here.
I have a question in terms of brand management. Commander Phelan, something you said. So it sounds like you give a lot of autonomy to your event planners and event coordinators to dictate not just the plans, but the security parameters of their event. And although internally, if something goes wrong with that event, you know, Rex or Carol might say, well, we're poor planners for the City Pride Center. If something goes wrong at that event, the media is going to say, well, the city and county of Denver doesn't know how to protect their event goers. And unfortunately, sometimes that's the face of public safety. So how do you manage that with a brand if you say, well, we need 100 cops, and obviously a cost is obviously associated with it, but to protect the brand for DPD and for the city and county?
I want to protect the brand. You know, that's a great question.
Everyone loves firefighters.
Yeah.
Our brand's protected.
And that's a good question, because what happens, we have some major events like you're talking about here, and what is the responsibility of the city, of the Denver Police Department, to furnish additional security for that event based on the knowledge we have or the assessment we made from kayak, whatever? What is our responsibility? And we do take that seriously, and we do make those decisions and those assessments saying, you know, there's this many people, based on the information we have at hand. So you might be having off-duty officers at your event and security at your event, but based on the information we have that we shared with you, we decided we might need to put additional on-duty Denver police resources towards that event, because not so much, it's not about saving the brand, it's about public safety issue. How do we ensure that we have, that the people attending that event are safe? How do we ensure that we have a response plan in place in case something does happen from information we have, that we can address that information? So that's how we look at it.
My question is a little twofold. I'm from CUPD. My counterparts and I often talk about this. If you do require security and extra security, a lot of these events, they have, you know, months in advance of planning. You've, you know, staff fire, EMS, officers. Let's say we have an event like we did in 2016 with the Orlando nightclub shooting, and I think 6 days later we had a Pride Fest here. I don't know if security was increased there, but who absorbs those costs? Is it the event planners because that's what's required of you, or is that just a general public safety?
No, we understand, national events do affect what happens here. So we understand that. So that would be something that we'd bear the cost of. We want to make sure that event, like I said earlier, is a safe event. So you've done a good job of planning your event. You've had this, what you feel is adequate security for the information you have. But we want to be a little extra careful based on what's happening, what's trending. We read the papers. We see what's on the news. It's the environment today, and so we take measures for that.
Anyone else on the panel?
Yeah, I wanted to add one quick thing to that when you're talking about public safety and protecting the brand. That's the importance of all of us being here together and messaging this out there, is that we are doing things heads and tails above, and I'm not in a comparison against other cities, but I think Ryan can attest to where we are as a city with our infrastructure, public safety, compared to other cities. And we take it very seriously, and I'll put it all the way up to the mayor. He takes it very seriously. And when you're putting that out there, when you're having your events, these types of, whether it's the event forum that we had a couple weeks ago, or this safety forum, these are big deals in the city. It's a big deal for all of us to be here and take this time to spread this message, to show you what we as a city are doing, what you as event organizers are doing, so that we can actually take this message out to the public and say, hey, we're doing everything we could do to make your events safe, fun, great, both on your end and our end. So getting that out there is a part of it.
Just as an example, the 3-year exercise series that we just kicked off this last year starts with a special event. It starts with a special event plan and everything else from a special event. It moves on from there, but I just want to throw that out there, that if you want to take it seriously, the mayor, the deputy mayor, every single leading appointee that runs a department goes through training specifically on what happens if something goes wrong. And we specifically use a special event to start that off.
Thank you. We still have time for a few more questions. Looks like we have a few over here.
So following up on that, Ryan, what I wanted to say, we're over at the Auraria Higher Education Center, big campus. Everybody partners well. Talked with Katie. Done events over there. I think we do great inter-agency. I'm wondering how we're going to continue to develop a culture of preparedness. I wonder what more we can do to engage community, engage other event planners, vendors, contractors, to help us prepare for the unexpected. Because we take it seriously on the campus and with our planners, and you can tell how the attendance here represents Auraria. But to be planned, organized, and executed, it takes a lot of people. And there's been a lot of great things shared here, and we really appreciate the opportunity to continue learning. So that's my question.
I'll just start off with your emergency manager, Eric Leith, and I worked closely together. When you write an emergency plan, we're one of the signatories to that emergency plan, so for the city as a whole. And in addition to just working together, I'm also the chair of one of the regional federal grant programs. And so the AHEC, or Higher Education Campus, is like that for us. It's part of our city, despite the whole state arrangement. At the end of the day, you're part of our city, where we feel that you're one of us, and I think we have a good working relationship. We do extend our training opportunities into the campus. We also, if Eric or any of your staff offer training, we offer it to the region so that we can build that resilience between not only our staffs and our teams, but also outreach to the actual students. Because that student population, at the end of the day, most of it, except for a very small part of it, goes home, and they go home through Denver. And so in doing that, we want to make sure they're aware, and we've started organizing between like Pepsi Center and the campus to make sure that if we do something with Pepsi Center, if the campus does something, that we're looking at how that affects the city.
I just got one follow-up, sorry. Nationally, where do we rate right now as far as being on top of these climate changes, if you will, in regards to things that we see with big events or large bodies of people gathering? How do you feel we gauge against the nation in preparedness? and continuing outreach and education? Just curious.
I
Because
would
I
say-
think we do great.
And I'm not giving you a number. I'm not going to answer your question any more than I answered his question about the threshold. However, I would say that this is a demonstration of exactly how much we take it seriously and how many resources we put towards it. I think we host it well. I think the fact that we have an Office of Special Events and that the Mayor's Office has made this effort to coordinate what is 27, 28 different agencies that you have to touch to have a permitted event, I think is phenomenal. I'm one of the 20, we're one of the 20 largest emergency management programs in the country. And those 20 of us, in fact, I'm getting together with them in just a couple weeks, and we go all around the country and trade stories about how we're doing, and that's New York City and LA and Seattle and Miami, and I can say that we're all working the issue. I think we've all got Office of Special Events, but it's the 20 largest cities and counties in the country. But I think we're putting the same effort, and I think we're getting some of the same impacts that we see in some of the larger cities and counties.
Thank you.
You might have a different answer.
I was going to say that I have conversations with most of the larger departments across the country and what they do with special events and their large public assemblies. And I would say that we are on par with and above most of them. They do some things differently that we look at and say, wow, we wish we could staff like that or do some of those things. And they look at us and go, wow, I can't believe you guys do those things. So what I would say is we are a top tier city on an increased trajectory. And I would just kind of from the fire side, that's how I would say.
And I would just add to that I think you're seeing what sets us apart, to kind of echo what Ryan said. But on the response community side, in my national travels, you don't see the three of us like our friends. we are friends. Like, we care about each other. And we work together seamlessly all the time on everything. And this level of collaboration is not common across the country. And so it's everybody planning in their individual silos of excellence. The police department's really good at what they do, but they don't talk to the rest of us or whatever in other cities. So I think that's what sets us apart. I think we've done a lot of joint policy development to address specific kinds of incidents and threats collectively across police, fire, and EMS. And that's another thing that you will not find in other places in the country very, very often, where we've developed joint response policies. We've done joint training across police, fire, and EMS where we've trained together. Instead of just within our own departments, we're training with each other. And those things, for the things that we've done in that realm, we are a shining beacon across the country, actually. A lot of places are looking at us going, wow, those guys got it figured out.
And we are everyone up here and the Office of Special Events always working together to try and improve things and address the changing climate. So great question. I believe we have another question or two over here, and we have a few more minutes. So
I had a quick follow-up question on the security liability question. I know with, ultimately it's up to us as event organizers to decide what level of security. You've mentioned that a data point that you're looking for is whether we have armed versus unarmed security. Normally that's a conversation that we often have with our insurance carriers, and they'll look at it and give us feedback. But I'm wondering, from your perspective, are there any tools or any factors that we as organizers should be considering when we make that determination?
Well, if you're talking about armed or unarmed security, I think there's a liability there. I think there's a training issue there. I think you have to be very careful on who you select and what the responsibilities are, and if they know what the responsibilities are. So, if there's any ever question, I think feel free to reach out to us, especially if you have some questions on your security plan, and we'll gladly give you some suggestions what we feel you might need on that. And to have armed security that isn't trained, that you don't know that individual, you don't know his training, you don't know his credentials, I think you got to be kind of careful with that.
Can I tag on to the insurance requirements thing? Insurance requirements are typically a pretty low bar for planning assumptions. And so in my world, you know, a lot of events will tell us that they want to put an EMT on site because that's what their insurance requirements recommend. And so you have one EMT that is, you know, carrying around a bunch of Band-Aids and stuff, and that's not going to get you done at the end of the day when it comes to, you know, particular types of events. So keep in mind that, you know, their recommendations, while that's the floor in my opinion.
Anyone else on the panel? Okay, another question over here.
First of all, thank you for putting on this exciting roundtable for us. My name's Marcus Robinson. I'm with Denver International Airport, and we have a unique challenge, one of which is that we just started to activate our plaza over the last 2 years. And so with our plaza being an airport, having the rail system coming directly inside the Westin makes our events kind of challenging. Even though I must admit the cornhole challenge that the commander talked about, we actually do have cornhole. We had that last summer, so we're bringing it back. But actually the question I'd really like to know is, the airport's in a unique situation where we actually have DPD on staff, DFD, paramedics, all the federal regulations in the world. So for us, how do we make that extra step in protecting our guests? Since most of the folks that come in are coming in, either they're flying out or they're flying in, or they're coming in on RTD. And so when you talked about the threat assessment, with most of the events that we have, they're actually all family orientated, but we do have our beer flights in the fall. So at what point do we ask our commander, saying, because of the increased transients that we have, the increased amount of marijuana that we have on our property at the Westin, do we have to make that ask at the commander level?
Yeah, the answer is yes. I mean, DIA, I'm surprised you didn't say den, because I thought everybody says den with that, but you're also, you and me. But yeah, and fortunately, you know, Denver, there's a commander at DIA, or DEN, and he makes all the decisions, both tactically, security issues, any type of events there. He is in charge of those events there. And if he makes a determination he needs additional resources, he has the wherewithal to come to us, come to the chief and make those requests, and we'll service that. So the starting point is there at DIA, and he's responsible for that.
I'll add to that. I was just on the phone with Steve Lee over at the airport just today. So we work closely with, I mean, again, we treat Denver International Airport as a city department. It's just a city department that's another time zone away. But we work closely together, and we just had that question about how we're trying to improve the warning capability at Denver International Airport so that they have the same capability we do to do all, you know, the iPause, the integrated public alert, the instant messaging. So we are working those issues, just like any other department, Mountain Parks or, you know, Public Works, come to us and we work together. I mean, that's why we're part of the mayor's office. Is I'm not a safety agency, I'm a public administration agency. I just do public administration the worst times. And so we are here to help you as a department or any other agency. We can address that and then bring in the right people.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Over here, do you, Nico, I'll get a microphone over to you.
Thank you. Just a quick question. There are more events now than there was 5 years ago.
Yes.
And I think that trend's probably going to continue. And again, I don't think it matters the size of the event. I think any event is, obviously, if it's your event, it's the most important event in town. It doesn't matter how many people are there. So it's a two-part question. One is, have we talked about maybe putting together some type of standard response protocol for venues? I know that every venue is different, but at the same time, we share a lot of staff across those venues. a lot of staff that works Pepsi Center also works Coors Field, they also work Red Rocks, whatever it may be. So has there been conversations about that type of training? Because I think it'd be very valuable to have that staff trained across the board to whatever venue they work, compared to every venue's different. And sometimes we run into that where they're like, well, they don't do it over, this is how they do it there, we do it this way here, and it does cause a lot of confusion. So just thoughts on that.
I'm all for standardization, but the issue is also what we license and what we don't. And I mean, we can influence, but we don't direct. For example, Coors Field versus Mile High, they have two different approaches, but those two approaches work well for their particular venues. My team, for example, works with, we have a full-time police officer and a part-time fire captain, who's also split among all the special events. And I mean, we're looking to how do we engage them and influence them to accept common practice, but it's still just influence. We're not here to, as you kind of pointed out a couple of times, we're not here to tell you, okay, you own a building in our city, you will do X. That's called the fire code, and is the city ordinance. And what we're here as emergency managers is say, here's some lessons learned, here's some things we do well. We just had that meeting with Coors Field. We've had that meeting, right after Manchester had a meeting with Coors Field like the next day. I mean, so there are ways to influence and use local events to influence, but it's influence right now, for me.
And so on our end, Tim, you know that all of our responses, and I'm assuming you mean a standardized response as far as what the venue gets for a specific incident. Is that, am I assuming?
More from the staff side of things. Our staff responding to an emergency that's actually happening or could be happening.
So one of the things that we've been trying to do is, and in that meeting we had last week when we did the after action on those 4 incidents, was the last comment that I made to Chris was, and we, for those in the room, at the Pepsi Center, we had some incidents that were, that we decided to come together and collaboratively come together between police, fire, and the Pepsi Center and just take a look at how things were handled. With that said, at the end of it, my recommendation was to make sure that stuff is shared with the other venues so that they can learn from it. And so on our end, everything is always the same. We're trying to be, for those in the room that don't know, the Denver Fire Department has not had a presence in the command center at the 3 sports venues ever. So we've had firefighters there from a fire code enforcement and a crowd control perspective, but we've never had anybody in the unified game day event command. So with the increase in security and safety, one of the things that we've done, and the 3 venues have been amazing, is we now have a command officer with police and EMS and the command teams from those 3 venues in a game day command scenario, so that the key critical decisions can be made in a very timely and effective manner and in accordance with the incident action or emergency action plans. So I think one of the factors that would really assist is that we find that some of the emergency action plans are different between the different venues. And not because the building is structurally different, just the way some of the issues are handled. They're not terribly different, but they're just slightly different. Like for us, we have Pepsi Center uses Stadium Medical. Sports Authority Field uses Denver Health. Denver firefighters work hand in hand on EMS with Denver Health. So when we respond to a call at the Pepsi Center, it's very different for us. But I'm just
same for us. And we don't really like to dictate who you choose to be your medical provider for your events, and nor can we choose. I mean, that's your decision. And we'll try to work with whomever you choose. But one thing that we do try to reserve particularly on events that are larger or present public safety implications, is we like to preserve that command and control prerogative on the medical side. So that's what we do. As Scott mentioned, we're shoulder to shoulder in all of the other command venues because we have different resources that we can bring to bear on that problem that aren't in your building. But if we don't know what's going on in your building, then for us that presents a problem because it's an unanticipated surge in demand that could take time for us to scale up to. And so we, if that opportunity presented itself, we would certainly love to have somebody in the command position with them in that building and in other venues.
Hey, Tim, maybe I have a different understanding of your question. And the way I understand it is you got staff, security staff that works Pepsi Center, security staff that works Corsville, security staff that works Broncos. A lot of those are the same people, but their instructions as far as responding to different situations is different based on the venue. Is that right? Thank you. That's what I understood. So what has to happen? I think we're willing, obviously the police department and fire, we're willing to come out there and try to standardize that, but that's up to those venues themselves to come together. Because depending on what security companies are working together and say, hey, let's have a uniform response. If I call it code red, if I call it code blue, this what this means here, what it means there, and what it means there. Is that? And I agree with that. I think that's a problem, and especially with people working. But it should be something similar. So I think it comes from those venue managers, though.
Thank you. We are going to take one more really quick question, and then we're going to wrap it up. But for anyone that didn't have their questions answered, if you write them down on those cards and get it to anyone from the Office of Special Events, we'll do our best to make sure that we get all those questions answered and sent out after this. So don't feel like we aren't going to take all the questions you have, but we just want to get it wrapped up here. So over here with the last question.
So thanks for sticking around. I'll make it quick. I'm kind of tying together two things here. The gal over there a couple questions ago had mentioned how can we all come together, not necessarily on your guys' side. Clearly you have provided us the materials with the office and everything to come together. I'm more on the staffing side as well, kind of with my colleague that was over there. So I guess to tie the two things together is basically how we can all work together is from a staffing perspective. Been to one event where I say, hey, let's have a meeting, and they say, no, just show up, I'll explain it 5 minutes before, and some way I say, hey, let's come out a week before, 2 days before. Basically what I'm saying is if planners include these staff members, not necessarily the members, but the management into their plan or a little bit of their plan, it helps us adapt, prepare. So if there's something, we're all talking about planning, but where's the plan B? How many times do we have a plan B? Because half the time it comes to us to, this isn't working, we need to fix it now. And we have to put our head, which is our job, of course, and we love coordinating and figuring that stuff, a plan B, out ahead of time. And do you guys have suggestions from your perspective as to how a plan B can kind of be planned out?
Well, as far as security concerned from the get-go, we've already identified gaps in certain events because security staff wasn't there from the beginning, that they weren't done. And what happens, what you're talking about happens all the time. You show up, hey, you're security, we're hiring you. Show up, meet me here at half hour before the event starts. And then you're supposed to have a knowledge of what that event's about. You're supposed to have a knowledge of where the exits are, the entrances are, the first aid is, lost kids. You can't do that. You're behind the curve. So event planners, if you do have security, you need to get that staff involved from the get-go. For the reason I just said, plus, they have the personnel, the staff. We've had some events, I think it was probably on one of the slides, we had 3 events on one day, okay? The drain on staffing just for security, you couldn't staff those events. So then you're trying to get staff there, they don't know what their job is, they don't know what to do, they don't know what their responsibility is. So the bottom line, as soon as you can get security staffing together, implement your plan, get them on board. They need to know what you need to know. Matter of fact, I don't want to get a soapbox, everybody needs to know what you know. Because when I go to an event, I should be able to ask the security guy, the vendor, anybody there, hey, where's the closest exit? Where's the bathrooms? And if you don't share that information, get that out on your plan, everybody should know that plan. And that kind of shows the success of the plan. Everybody is on board. Everybody has the information. There's some decision makers, but everybody has that information. And I have that problem too. We'll staff something with 100 officers. Believe me, trying to get that information to everybody is tough. But from the get-go, I guess.
All right, thank you. So, sorry, we have about 5 minutes left, so we're going to have Katie from the Office of Special Events come back up. And if we have time, maybe after her conclusion, to stick around for a few more minutes, but I know some folks are probably getting hangry out there or have other meetings to get to, so.
I'm just going to throw one last thing out there, which is that 911 is not a plan.
When he said.
Okay, so thank you all. It looks like our crowd has thinned, but the majority of us is still here. I wanted to first, I can't say enough thanks for this group up here. As you can see, Denver's pretty special. We have, I think everyone's emphasized relationships. You can see here, we have these relationships. We work with these guys and women day in and day out, and relationships fosters better communication and respect for each other and not stepping on each other's boundaries. You can see just from our working relationships how we care about each other, and we're putting it out there for you. We care about our jobs and our roles so much that we need to impress it upon all of you to build the same relationships within events. Meet each other, understand what each other is doing, share best practices with each other. There's never, everyone's saying it, you can never say too much. You can never ask too many questions. So I want you to, as you leave here, introduce yourselves to each other. Learn who each other is, understand who your community is. I'm going to just say a few thanks. First, Channel 8, thank you guys. You rock. Thank you for filming this and then being able to extend this further beyond what just happened here today. I want to thank the people who helped plan this, OSC, or no, that's us. The other emergency management, our planning partners. Huge kudos for you guys, and thanks for getting on board with this and just parallel planning this. We think it was an invaluable process, just planning it, not just the presentation of it. David Powell right here, wave your hand, and Nate Hayden right there, wave your hand. These were the two big planners for this. So thanks to you guys, the rest of my office, Office of Special Events. If you don't know who we are, find out who we are. We are the central hub that can connect you to anyone, any agency in the city, and we're busy, but we love it that way. So come look us up, come find us. What we're going to do with this information is we're going to send it to you. If you registered, if we have your email address, we're going to send everything we got to you. When we'll get a list of questions that have not been answered. We'll show you the question, we'll show you the answers. We don't have an end in sight for this process. There just can't be an end in sight. We're looking at new policies. We're looking at new processes, new procedures. We don't know what the next policy is going to be, but we're looking at it. All these agencies are working together saying, what is that baseline requirement that we can put out there? There's no magic answer right now, but as you can see, we're talking about it, we're thinking about it, and we're trying to figure out how to provide you as much support as we possibly can so that you're as successful and as smart of a planner as you can possibly be. And you can learn from each event and from each incident. So the last thing I think what I would ask from you all is that you help us. This is our incident after action plan. We need to send you guys a survey. We want to send you a quick survey that says, how was this for you? What did you learn? What was the problem? Did you sit too long? Did you need a game or something like that, an icebreaker? Cornhole is next. But we want to improve this. This is going to be streaming on Channel 8. Watch it. I sat here and learned probably 20 things that I didn't remember that I knew before. So watch this over and over. Look at your notes over and over. Send this link to people you know. Send this link to the people you're planning the event for. Say, this is what we're dealing with, and we need you on board because these are the requirements and these are the things that we need to look at. The more that we can spread this information, the better for you as event planners and for the success of events. We want the best event planners, the smartest event planners in the country. I think we have them. Let's see how we can raise that bar. Let's how we can be a better city, a better event planners. safer, save lives. So we'll send that survey out. Be honest with us. If this was boring and you're sore from sitting, tell us that. We'll figure it out. But I appreciate everyone for coming, for your rapt attention. It's been pretty phenomenal. For this board, this panel up here, you guys have been amazing. You guys are amazing to work with. Yes.